Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, are political journalists being conned by Number 10 and spreading lies? Over the past weeks and months of Brexit wrangling, many people claim to have noticed a change in how Downing Street is using the media to get its message out. The veteran journalist Peter Oborne has accused some of the UK's biggest news outlets of effectively becoming clients of Boris Johnson's government and of spreading fake news. Peter Oborne is with me now. So we've all seen those tweets talking about senior Downing Street sources saying things, stories that turned out to be true, like prorogation, were denied. But wasn't it always like this? I mean, haven't journalists always relied on anonymous sources?
Of course, you're right that journalists have always relied on anonymous sources. But what is new, and it's happened the moment that Boris Johnson entered Downing Street at the end of July, and brought with him Johnson and Cummings, his senior advisor, and a group of other figures from within the old Vote Leave campaign, that a total unscrupulousness has developed. And I would criticise a very large number of very senior British journalists, Laura Kuenssberg, Peston, the Daily Mail. I know it's important to name names. Well, anyway, my own paper, the Daily Mail, the Mail on Sunday, and what they're doing is passing on rubbish very often, information, much of it false, straight on, sometimes via Twitter, sometimes via their own reports, much of which turns out to be false.
Well, you see, I mean, Robert Peston has replied to you, and he said it's his job to draw back the veil and to report things that are said to him. Now, and that makes us all the wiser. Yeah.
The problem, though, here is instead of doing the job of a journalist, which is to interrogate in a sceptical way the information you're getting from Number 10 Downing Street, what they are actually doing is just shoveling it on unmediated and allowing themselves to become effectively press spokesman for Boris Johnson and the senior advisor, Johnson and Cummings.
But do you think that this is being done to deliberately mislead? Of course, that they're trying to deliberately lie and that's a new departure? Or is this just the normal, government has a plan, it briefs it out, plans change, things don't go according to plan?
As I said at the start, it is a completely new state of affairs which can be dated directly to the moment Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. It enables the Prime Minister to have two public policies. He will, for instance, he will say, I'm going to obey the courts in a promise to the courts, and at the same time, a compliant political editor of national fame will tweet or say that he or she is understanding from their sources that the Prime Minister is doing something else. The problem, my very strong criticism of a large number of political editors is they are not interrogating this. Government sources, and they're also using them to pass on smears, lies, fake news, and they're debauching British political discourse.
Is it actually down to individuals, or is it down to, the editors, the bosses, the newspaper bosses that are sort of? I mean, some of the newspapers want to support Boris Johnson, so they're putting this stuff out there.
Yes, so media organisations.
Does it come down to individual lobby journalists? Or?
Well, I would say, of course, every lobby journalist is responsible for his or her output. And I think, I'm quite certain, I'm afraid, it's quite shameful in my view, that they are allowing themselves to be gamed, to be managed, to be manipulated by these Downing Street sources.
But if what you're saying is correct, then obviously it's quite a sinister development in terms of the management of the media.
It's more than that, it's a betrayal of journalism.
So how should the media respond? How should things change? How could you run things differently if that's the way they behave?
I think it's about time that when a government source was quoted, he or she was identified. So instead of saying a government source says, quotes a government source smearing Dominic Grieve or Amber Rudd or somebody, you say this smear has been carried out by Lee Kane, for instance.
But won't that just reduce the amount of information being given?
Well, no, but it's proper. That's proper journalism. Of course, it would reduce this, but it's quite shocking that government sources inside Downing Street are allowed, without being interrogated in a proper journalistic fashion, they're just shoving this on, playing the role, really, of sewer for government smears and false news. I mean, in my article for Open Democracy, I give a number of examples of fake news put out from Downing Street. Again, also, I would like to point out, it's important to point out one thing. There is a distinction between the official press office and the cabinet office, which are straightforward and have integrity, and this gang of feral deceit smear merchants based around Johnson Cummings, who just chuck out fake news and is taken on board and used shamelessly by news organisations.
Well, I mean, look, it's an interesting argument. I must say, because they're not here, all of the people you named, I'm sure, would argue that they are fully
You ran around
principled.
Fleet Street this afternoon, and you couldn't find a single one of them to come on against me.
Yeah, they weren't
Pathetic.
keen. And Boris Johnson also has refused to appear before the MPs Liaison Committee tomorrow, which also tells you something about the difficulty of holding them to account. But Peter Oborne, thank you very much indeed.